this is Mr. Ben here with another edition of Know Your History. I work at the Logan Library, which is of course in Logan Township, New Jersey. And many people are unaware of why the Logan Library is named Logan, or Logan Township is named Logan. In 1877, Logan Township was established, what used to be called West Woolwich, and they changed the name to Logan. And the reason they did is because they wanted to, well, they probably wanted a catchier name than West Woolwich. And they named the town, the township that is, after this man, General John Alexander Blackjack Logan. They called him Blackjack because he had jet black hair and a jet black mustache, and he was swarthy. His complexion was dark. And here he is with a chest full of medals. And until recently, this picture was hanging up in the Logan Library on the wall. I borrowed it so I could show you. I won't tell anyone, but I'll return it in due time. So General Logan was from Illinois. He really had no connection to New Jersey whatsoever. So why would they name the new township founded in 1877 after this man? Well, that's what I wanted to tell you about. Now, Logan's father was an immigrant from Northern Ireland, and here's a copy of a photograph of John Logan, Dr. John Logan. He came to America, settled in Illinois, southern Illinois, and established his medical practice. Now, Dr. Logan wanted his son, John, to follow in his footsteps and also become a doctor. But being of an independent mind, young John decided that he wanted to read the law, become a lawyer, and enter politics. There's young John without his bushy mustache. Now, Logan was an officer in the Mexican War. His unit did not see any fighting. However, he did come down with a bad case of the measles, and which could be pretty serious, as 9 members of his regiment died from the measles, but John was okay. He returned to civilian life, began practicing law, and started dabbling in politics. He was elected to the state legislature, and eventually he was elected as a congressman, a Democratic congressman, to the House of Representatives in 1858. Now, soon after, the Civil War began in 1861, and John was in Washington for a special session of Congress. Now, on July 18th, 3 days before the first big battle of the war, First Bull Run, or First Manassas as it's known in the South, John and some other fellow congressmen decided they wanted to go and visit the Union camps near Manassas, Virginia. This is just about 25 miles south of Washington. So they went, and all of a sudden the Confederate artillery opened up on the Union soldiers. Now, the congressmen that John was with, they fled, but John instinctively went to the sound of the guns. And what he saw disgusted him, because he saw 5 Union privates being led out of the battle by a corporal. They were skulkers. So John didn't like that. So he went up to one of the soldiers and said, "Give me your gun." That was his first command of the war. He's still a civilian, but he takes the soldier's rifle and his cartridge box, and he goes and joins the battle line with the 1st Michigan. And there he fights at a place called Blackburn's Ford along the Bull Run Creek. It's a pretty sharp skirmish. And Logan fires all of his ammunition, and then when he's finished, here he is in his frock coat and silk top hat. And when he runs out of ammunition, he starts helping to carry the wounded off the battlefield, ruining a good suit in the process, I might add. Well, after that skirmish, Logan went back to Washington and went straight to the White House and went to see President Lincoln, his fellow Illinois politician. And Lincoln gave him a commission, signed a commission for Logan to raise a regiment back in southern Illinois in Logan's district so that he could become colonel of this regiment, which eventually became the 31st Illinois. And here he is, Colonel John Logan, which was a pretty good feat considering that most of his district were Southern sympathizers. Even his own sister, Annie, whose husband joined the Confederate Army, was against him because she had strong Southern sympathies. Well, after John raised the regiment and equipped it, and they were marching to the war, Logan decided to march it right by his house there in Murfreesboro, Illinois. And as they were marching by the house, his wife Mary and sister Annie were looking out the door or on the porch, watching the troops and Logan march by. And Annie shouted, "Darn you, I hope you get killed before you get to Cairo." Now, she didn't say darn. Regardless, that was too much for Mary. So they started to brawl. And there's a picture of Mary and Annie coming to blows. And I think this little battle ended when Mary, Logan's wife, hit Annie over the head with a chair. Now, they talk about the Civil War being brother against brother. Well, here you have a case of sister against sister. Now, Logan fought many of his battles under this man. You'll probably recognize him if my drawing does him justice. Ulysses Simpson Grant, who became Lieutenant General Grant later in the war. And he was Logan's superior officer at the first battle that Logan fought at, which was Belmont, Missouri. That was fought in November of 1861 and was also Grant's first battle. And it happened to be a Confederate victory. It was one of the few battles that Grant ever lost. Well, in this particular battle, Logan was not wounded, but his horse received a blast of shrapnel and was collapsed dead. And a mini ball struck Logan's pistol and shattered the handle of his pistol. But Logan was a close call, but he was unscathed. Unfortunately, at the next battle, the Battle of Fort Donelson, that Logan fought at, he would be seriously wounded. That's the battle where Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, got his famous nickname, Unconditional Surrender Grant, when the Confederate general holding Fort Donelson asked for terms for surrender, and Grant said, "No terms will be allowed except for unconditional surrender, immediate and unconditional surrender. I propose to move upon your works." Well, this electrified the North. And so a legend was born there on February 15th, 1862 at Fort Donelson. Meanwhile, Logan, who had been shot through the shoulder, the ball entered his shoulder right where the shoulder and the chest connect. It went clean through the shoulder, but it nicked an artery and he lost a lot of blood. And here he is being carried off the battlefield and onto a waiting ambulance. Now, the doctors wanted to amputate Logan's arm, but Logan insisted that they did not. But infection and fever set in, and Logan almost died. Now, back in Illinois, back home, Logan's wife, Mary, read in the newspaper that her husband was dead. It was an erroneous report, but here's a photograph of General Logan's wife, Mary. So she went to Cairo, where they had sent General Logan to the hospital there, and she was thinking she was going to recover her husband's body, when in fact, when she got there, he was very much alive, although, as she said, he looked like death. He was very ill, but under her tender care, he recovered, and after a few months, he was back with the Army, that being the Army of the Tennessee. Now we'll fast forward to the Battle of Vicksburg. That was another famous battle fought by General Grant. There were several battles outside of Vicksburg, Mississippi, and the Confederates retreated. They were defeated in these battles like Champion Hill and fought in June of 1863, and they retreated back into their strong fortifications that ringed the city of Vicksburg. So Grant and his army laid siege to Vicksburg, trying to starve out the Confederates. And every so often they would attack, but they couldn't break through the earthworks. It was at this battle that General Logan would be awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions there in fighting several battles and during the siege, during the Vicksburg campaign. Now, the Congressional Medal of Honor, that's our nation's highest military award, which General Logan received for that campaign. He's also been promoted to Major General at this time. Now, a curious incident occurred while during the siege of Vicksburg. Some soldiers who had in civilian life been miners, they dug a tunnel underneath a salient in the Confederate works. That's part of the earthworks that kind of stuck out. And underneath, they tunneled underneath the Confederates without them knowing it, and they planted a ton of black powder underneath this salient, and took a slow-burning fuse and lit the match and blew a hole in the earthworks. The idea being that they could send in a lot of troops immediately after and break through the earthworks and get to the city. Well, it didn't work out that way. But an interesting thing happened. There was a slave, his name was Abraham, and the rebels had him working on the earthworks, shoring up the earthworks, and he was right directly over where the mine exploded. And he was thrown up 100 feet or so into the air from the rebel works all the way into the Union lines. And he landed in the midst of Logan's, in his division, in the midst of his astonished soldiers. Now, Abraham wasn't even hurt. Now, soldiers being of an entrepreneurial spirit, they put Abraham in a tent, and they charged admission for other soldiers and other divisions to come and see this curiosity, the man who was literally blown to freedom. Of course, he's no longer a slave. He's been emancipated. Eventually, Abraham would get a job with P.T. Barnum's Museum of Curiosities in New York City. Now, after the Battle of Vicksburg concluded with the surrender of General Pemberton to General Grant on July 4th, 1863, which coincided with Lee's retreat from the Battle of Gettysburg, it was a great day for the Union. Now, General Logan received a 21-day furlough to go home and rest. But he used the time to stump, in other words, to give political speeches for the Republicans. Remember, he used to be a Democrat and from Southern Illinois, but now he's a Republican. He's giving speeches for Republican candidates and supporting Lincoln and the war effort. And here he is stumping, giving a stump speech, literally standing on a tree stump so that the people could hear his speech. He was a very powerful speaker, General Logan. Fast forward again, and we have General Logan back with the Army. His furlough was extended, by the way, through the November elections. But it's 1864, and he fights through the Atlanta campaign. He was slightly wounded at a place called Dallas, Georgia, where there was a minor battle. But he kept right on going without missing a beat. Now, when General James McPherson of the Union Army was killed, General Logan replaced him. Now, this is the Army of the Tennessee. Grant has gone east, and General Sherman, William Tecumseh Sherman, is in command of the Western Army, which is really three armies: the Army of the Tennessee, the Army of the Cumberland, and can't think of the third one, but regardless. So Logan is back, and he is in now command in place of McPherson of the Army of the Tennessee. Here's a civilian soldier who has risen in the ranks to from a volunteer to a major general commanding an army. And here he is at the Battle of Atlanta. Now, the Confederates have been pushed back into the earthworks that were protecting Atlanta when they came out and briefly pushed the Union line back. Well, at this moment, General Logan is rallying the troops and trying to get them together for a counterattack, which they would do and push the rebels back into their entrenchments. And here he is rallying the troops outside of the earthworks surrounding Atlanta. And one soldier described him as a hurricane on horseback. Now, McPherson being dead and Logan in command of the army, but it only lasted for 5 days. That's the Army of the Tennessee. Sherman wanted a West Point, a military-trained soldier to be in command of an entire army. So Logan went back to Corps Command. Now this kind of upset Logan, and so he didn't care for West Point trained officers very much. Now, the man who replaced him, well, here's a picture of General Sherman there in the middle with his officers, his general officers. And there you see Logan to Sherman's right. And then on the far right, you see Oliver Otis Howard, the general who replaced Logan in command of the army. Funny story about General Howard. He had lost his arm at the Battle of Seven Pines early in the war in May of 1862. That's not the funny part. What happened was he was back into recuperating in a federal hospital, field hospital, and General Phil Kearny of New Jersey, who had lost his left arm in the Mexican War, and you see Howard has lost his, you see the empty sleeve, his right arm, and he came to visit General Howard, and he said, "Cheer up, Howard. At least now we can buy our gloves at the same store." You see, because, he only needed one glove apiece. It's not that funny when you have to explain it. Okay. After the war, after the surrender of the Confederate armies, by the way, Logan participated in Sherman's march to the sea and is advanced from Savannah up through the Carolinas until General Joseph Johnston surrendered the remnants of the Confederate Army of Tennessee in North Carolina. And the war was over. Sadly, Lincoln was assassinated. But General Logan, no longer a general, back to civilian life, he becomes a politician again, and he becomes a senator from Illinois, but he's elected as a Republican. Now, several years later, in 1884, he runs for vice president on the Blaine-Logan ticket. James Blaine was running for president and Logan vice president, and they were defeated by Grover Cleveland of New Jersey who won the presidential election. Some people said had their positions been reversed, had Logan been running for president and Blaine for vice president, they may have been elected. Now, in 1886, Logan dies before his just short, a few months shy of his 60th birthday. And here's a photograph of his. It's hard to see, but that's the general lying in state as dignitaries file past in the Capitol building. Now, when we have to remember that his accomplishments, besides being the best political general to come out of that war for the Union side, he also was active in Veterans Affairs, particularly with the Grand Army of the Republic, and he also began the observance of Memorial Day. Little known fact, when Logan he died, they sent over the wires a message, a simple message, Logan is dead. Now, nobody had to ask what Logan or who's Logan, because everybody knew. The nation was stunned. Now, that is why Logan Township, and by extension Logan Library, is named after this gentleman, General John Blackjack Logan. So I hope you know something about Logan. In case anybody asks you, particularly those of you who live in Logan Township, you can impress your friends by telling them just who Logan was. Well, thank you for listening, and it's about all the time we have, so tune in next whenever for the next edition of Know Your History.